Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Shea Anything podcast. Doug Williams and Andy Martino with you this week. Just a reminder, we're coming at you every Monday for the rest of this, what should be a very busy offseason for the New York Mets. Have some Keith, some Andy, some me, a little bit of everybody, a little bit of everything. And please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever. We appreciate it as always. Andy, how you doing on this rainy Monday?
You know, I like rainy fall days, Doug. I find them relaxing. There's an inherent pressure in a nice day that you have to maximize it and do something. But on a rainy day, you have the excuse to stay in. So it's more emotionally doable to me. It's like, well, it's a crappy day, so I can just be a loser. It's like,
Yeah.
Lower expectations.
I totally agree with you. And I'm also, a couple days ago, I decided, okay, I live in New York City. Every morning, instead of making coffee at home, even though it's the wrong choice for my, budget and money spending, every morning I should walk to go get coffee because it's a good way to just like get out, get some steps in. And, I spend the rest of the day in the apartment like a hermit other than the show. And I'm so far 0 for 4. I have not done that yet. Today, I was like, I'm not going out in that. No chance. It's just not the right thing to do. So I made coffee at home. Haven't left yet.
I think that's a good idea overall, but it's especially a pandemic idea because you're not paying for the coffee. You're paying for the experience of the fresh air. And you never know what you're going to – I ran into someone very interesting at my local Starbucks just last week because I forced myself to do the same thing. You don't have life experiences when you don't leave your house. And
Exactly.
that's what you forget during a pandemic.
Although this is a life experience. We're in our own homes, but we're doing a podcast, which
you know what I mean. You don't have random life experiences of things. You got to leave your house to really live your life, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I mentioned the show, and when I say that, I mean Baseball Night in New York. And it occurred to us this week that we, some of our listeners of this podcast may not know that Andy and I are also featured on a 6 o'clock show on the actual SNY network. And so if you think, wow, I listen to these two guys every week, I wonder just how handsome they are. I know they're handsome, but I just don't know the level of handsomeness that they're at. Well, you can tune in at 6 o'clock on SNY. We talk Mets, Yankees, we talk baseball stories. We'll talk a little bit of the playoffs as well as they're going on. We have fun with it. I mean, Andy, I don't know what you want to add, but it's just to make it sounds cliche, but it's really not just like the average baseball show. Like we have really creative producers. We have a really fun time with it.
And we have some pretty good people on it too, other than me and you. I mean, the fact that I get to be on set or these days appear in a little Zoom box with the likes of a Todd Zeal or a Jim Duquette or an Anthony Recker and people who have this firsthand knowledge of the game. Honestly, that's like a privilege for me as a participant. So for a viewer, I mean, forget about me and Doug. Like the people that are on that show, aside from us, are pretty freaking cool. So that's
and it has a little bit of everything. Like we have former players, like Andy just mentioned. We have Jim Duquette, the front office perspective. We've got writers like John Harper, Anthony McCarron, in addition to Andy. And we also have, Sal and Moose and Dan Grassa. So you get the opinion that you might be craving after a big game, big loss, big win. But you also get the analysis that baseball writers and former players can give you. So a little bit of shameless self-promotion, but we wanted to make sure that you guys were aware that that was available to you weeknights at 6 on SNY. Andy, last week on the podcast, you went through just some updated names that you were hearing in terms of what Sandy's front office may look like under Steve Cohen. Can you add any names to what you discussed last week? I was trying to pry them out of you. You were like, well, I haven't reported on it yet enough. So later that day, like right when the podcast came out, you had the news, which was a little frustrating to be me, but I'm just curious yourself.
What was the news again? Like, I don't remember the timing. What did I leave out of the podcast?
Are you really asking me to recap your own reporting?
I don't remember the way it broke down. Like, I don't remember what I left out of the podcast to then further report later.
Well, I'll find it.
Was it front office names?
Yes.
Well, yeah, names kind of trickle in as I do my diligence and my day job, my calls around the league here and try to vet certain names. There's not a lot of names that are rumored that don't necessarily check out. I did hear Peter Woodfork at the MLB office, who was in the mix for the Astros GM job last winter as somebody who could be considered by the Mets. I would actually add to that, and this is my speculation, not reporting. So to be clear about that, but I know that Sandy Alderson has been a big backer of the former pitcher Chris Young for a long time. Was with him in San Diego, brought him to New York, admires his work in the league office. So I haven't heard that Chris Young could become a candidate, but that would be a very unsurprising thing to me as well.
So isn't Chris Young the guy who was in charge of discipline this past year?
Yeah,
in Major League Baseball. So would he
gets
would that be a promotion for him?
Just different. Like it's a general manager of a team would be a lower rank in the sport than a high ranking guy in the commissioner's office, but that's all about what people want to do. It's also cool to run a team, right? I don't want to go too far with the Chris Young. It's a good question. I don't want to go too far with speculation because he's not in the mix in any way I've been able to report, but I know the relationship between him and Alderson. And I know that Alderson is someone that would think Chris Young could run a team someday if that's a path that Chris Young chose. So if his phone rang at some point during this process, it wouldn't shock me. That's all I'm saying about him. Woodfork, who works with Young in the league office, actually, I think he is on the list.
Okay. Well, that stuff's interesting. And again, we've talked a lot about Sandy, and last week we talked about kind of his philosophy as a GM. Going to be so interesting to see what his philosophy as a team president is, how involved he'll be, what his hires at GM, say about him and how he feels this job should be done. And if he hires somebody who's coming out of the MLB office, I think that is interesting in and of itself and tells you how he wants the ship to be run. Also this week, want to talk about a couple of the members of the Mets coaching staff. And this is interesting because we really haven't talked that much about this. And we have Chili Davis and Jeremy Hefner to talk about. And, Pat Russler's name you've reported is in the mix. And Kevin Long is now a free agent. I don't think he's going to be brought back, but that's why you're here.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think he might.
Okay. So Kevin Long is no longer with, it was the Nationals, correct?
Nationals,
contract. Yeah, the Nationals, his contract's up. So he's a free agent as a hitting coach. Chili Davis is a guy that, and we'll start with him and then talk Hefner after. Guy that players seem to rave about. Now, due to health conditions, he was not with the team this year. He was coaching remotely. Is he a sure thing to be brought back as hitting coach, or are you saying that that's not the case?
No, definitely not a sure thing. This is what happens when a new regime comes in, that nobody's job is secure, whether you're good or not, really, because it's a game of relationships. And when one regime hired you and another one comes in, then it is what it is. It's tough business that way sometimes. But with Chili Davis, absolutely done a nice job, according to many players. Somebody who, even in working remotely, got a lot of praise this year from guys on the Mets, the hitters that like him. And there are people in that front office that think he's doing a really nice job and might argue for him to stay. But Sandy Alderson's always been really, really specific about what he wants for a hitting coach. He likes approach guys, like philosophy guys. His first hire with the Mets was Dave Hudgens, then it was Kevin Long. These are guys that have really specific philosophies about hunting pitches and approaches and stuff. And Chili Davis is more of there's kind of like mechanics guys and approaches guys in hitting coaches. Mechanics guys are like, let me look at Jeff McNeil's swing and you're doing this and bring your hands down here a little bit and move your hip a little. And then there's the Dave Hudgens types that are approach guys, which are like the hitting philosophy is hunt your pitch. Am I making clear the difference there, Doug, or am I babbling?
No, I think you are. And I think what made Chili Davis, at least from my perspective, an interesting guy to listen to and listen to hitters talk about was that he was very player friendly in terms of his, like, here's what you should be doing, forget launch angle. Like that kind of conversation is the one we've been having about Chili. And It was less philosophical. He wasn't trying to outsmart the average guy at home.
So, So Alderson is historically liked a more approach-based hitting coach rather than a mechanics-based guy. So Chili's the latter. So we'll see what happens there.
At what point, Andy, I mean, if Six is getting brought back, if Kevin Long is getting brought back, if Sandy Alderson's getting brought back, I mean, the Mets have historically sometimes clung to members of old front offices, coaching staffs, regimes. Sometimes they bring back players a couple too many times. Juan Lagares was on the 2020 Mets for some reason.
And then he was really weirdly mad when they cut him. Remember? He made like a mad Instagram post. It's like, dude. Anyway, go ahead.
If you're at home as a Mets fan being like, okay, I mean, yeah, they had a World Series run, but like what I was thinking would happen is like a new Mets organization and this would all look different. And now you're bringing back the hitting coach, the assistant hitting coach, potentially the general manager to be the president. Like, why is this going to look so similar? I mean, I understand Sandy has guys that he's comfortable with, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they worked then and that they'll work again.
So when Kevin Long and Pat Rossler brought them to the offense to the World Series, that didn't work?
No, I'm saying they left. They were no longer with the organization.
Well, Pat Rossler left because he didn't get Mickey Callaway was difficult to work with, and the relationship was not good. So Mickey Callaway being gone, that helps. Kevin Long left because he wanted more money, I think, which was his right, and the Nationals gave it to him, if I'm remembering the timeline correctly. So it wasn't really a acrimonious parting about philosophy.
Well, other than like the occasional pitching coach that's with a team forever, maybe hitting coach just isn't a job you keep for a long time. But Kevin Long, between Yankees, Mets, Nationals, it bounces around, and
he does.
I just feel like if he was
like, if this guy's so good, why does he keep leaving jobs? Is that what you're getting at?
Right. And it's a little bit like, again, maybe it's just a job guys don't keep for a long time. But my concern is that you're bringing back a lot of names because they feel familiar. And I'm just saying that as somebody with no knowledge of these actual conversations and how good these guys might be at their jobs. But to the skeptical Met fan at home, it's like, I know you know these guys and you have a good relationship with them, but does that mean that they're the best for the job?
Well, first, I hear you. So a couple of things about that. Number one, they're not definitely bringing back Kevin Long. I was just saying it's possible, and it is possible. So I don't want to throw that in the same, like, oh, I'm saying that they're going to bring him back. But I'm sure they'll talk, and I'm sure that could be a possibility. That's one thing. But to your larger point about bringing in older name or familiar names in the coaching staff, potentially, I would say that the fan would probably be best served to minimize the importance of a coaching staff in their minds. What's going to be really different about the Mets is the back end. We've talked about this a lot, as we talked about. Other people have subsequently written about this. There's going to be a lot of research and development and modernization with the Mets. You talk about Brody Van Wagenen talked about expanding the analytics staff, and they did add to the head count. But at the end of the day, it was a department that was just a little analytics department, whereas like the Dodgers and the Yankees have these massive research and development arms. And I think the Mets will go further in that direction. And those are the kinds of things that will be significantly different for the team than they were under the first Alderson regime. Whatever the faces are in the dugout weren't as coaches. That's not as important.
Yeah, maybe this is my own bias coming in. I just was a big fan of what I at least heard from players about both Hefner and Chili Davis. And change for the sake of change sometimes is not worth it. And I guess I have a little bit of that Met fan skeptic in my head that I'm trying to describe, which is like, you've got Omar Minaya in the organization. You've got Terry Collins, who's been in the organization. You're bringing Sandy Alderson back to the organization. There's just a lot of the past that's still with the present. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but all those people are, and I know you're going to say all those people are qualified.
No, I'm going to say actually that all those people aren't necessarily with the organization going forward. Sandy,
I know.
Announcements yet, so we'll see how it all shakes out.
Yeah.
I guarantee there'll be new blood in there as well, is what I'm saying.
What about Hefner, Andy? Because I thought, well, first of all, I loved talking to him during the kind of like COVID break. He joined the Baseball Night in New York show, and he's just really interesting to talk to about his pitchers. And what do you think? Do you think this is a one and done, or do you think that from the perspective that you were just talking about how Sandy views hitting coaches, does that transfer over to pitching coaches as well?
I think people close to the situation are wondering about that, how it's going to go with Hefner. He's a delightful guy. He's very smart. really into the analytics. I think the fair evaluation of him that he'd probably give to himself is that he's a first-year pitching coach under very difficult circumstances this year. He was learning, did a nice job. I'm sure he could identify areas of improvement and areas that he's proud of, and he's going to have to wait and see if the new general manager, whoever that person may be, wants him as the pitching coach. I think these are all just, hey, look, leadership changed. So if you're an employee, we'll see what happens.
I thought it was funny, and maybe we'll have this conversation with Keith in the coming weeks on the podcast, but Gary, Keith, and Ron, every time Hefner would come out, would kind of make a joke about how often he did come out.
Yeah.
He was a frequent visitor to the mound in his first year as a pitching coach. And I actually thought at times that was kind of interesting because, he's closely removed and from being a big league pitcher and is a young guy and knows, at least thinks he knows, when somebody needs a talking to and a pep talk or needs to be reminded about something mechanical. And I just think, again, if you listen to what players say about coaches, that gets tricky, because even before Mickey Callaway was fired, players were saying like, that's our guy, we like him. And I don't know if that was ever true or if it was public posturing or what, but players oftentimes, no matter what the situation, say nice things about their coaches before they leave or if they stay.
And their teammates. I think the main thing is, I understand why this would confuse people, because when other people are talking, you think you can believe what they say. But when a player's talking in public, what do you think about, hey, Yankee pitcher? What do you think about Gary Sanchez? Hey, Met player, what do you think about Mickey Callaway? They're not thinking, how can I be honest? They're thinking, how can I create the least trouble for myself by answering non-controversially? That's all. That's not an honest exchange of ideas, a public, interview like that. So I would say it's to be completely discarded, except for a few very rare individuals who are honest in those.
So the next three topics on our rundown that we want to talk about today are all kind of under the umbrella of baseball in this town, what it's going to be like having the Steinbrenners on one side and Steve Cohen potentially on another. And, we have written down that JT Realmuto maybe wants $200 million, according to a report. That, we keep talking about Realmuto and Bauer, but are there any other names that you're hearing that may be interesting for the Mets? DJ LeMahieu is a free agent for the Yankees. Would he be interesting for the Mets? All of this is under that context of like what it will be like to see if these two teams in New York are going to, chase after free agents as a competition thing with each other. Do you see this being kind of the new vibe of baseball in New York, that these two teams are going to try and outspend one another?
I don't. I really don't. I think that on the Yankees side, they're going to be really tight this winter with their free agent spending. So that's right there kind of unfortunately undermines that hope that it would be this fun thing where they were both chasing the same players. And with the Mets, as we've talked about before, like their objective under Steve Cohen will not be like wildly chasing all these free agents either. So, I would be surprised as of today if Realmuto was playing in New York next year on either team, but I certainly could be wrong. It's very early and the Mets don't even know who's going to be running the team yet in a sense. So I'm not like firmly saying that, but I wouldn't think the Yankees are going to go after Bauer or Realmuto or necessarily the Mets, but we'll see how it all develops. That's just my vibe for today.
So it's so interesting. So this report comes out that he wants that much money, Realmuto does. And you said last week that like you were already skeptical of the way Sandy Alderson thinks about contracts, et cetera, that he would be a fit. So this would lead you to think that if Realmuto gets anywhere close to that amount of money, that Sandy will be like, why would I do that when I can get a good defensive catcher who hits 13 home runs for me for $6 million a year?
Honestly, why would anybody do that? If you can get James McCann and like 5 other players, what are you spending $200 million for in a 30-year-old catcher, as great as he is? That might be my opinion as well, come to think of it.
Yeah, I'm getting close. And that's what's so funny is that the contract kind of frames the player in some ways. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing for the player and the representative, but when you hear a story like that, it's like, wow, suddenly you start to think about the negatives and the age and the injury history and all this, when JT Realmuto is objectively a great player. But when you start to talk about the free agent, different thoughts start to creep in. And that's what's interesting. And I mean, look, if he gets that money, good for him. And I don't know who's going to give it to him, but I'm starting to think it's not a smart play for a team and a general manager. LeMahieu, Andy, and sometimes we get a little too into this. Like, hey, there's a Yankee who's going to be a free agent. Do the Mets want to steal that guy? And that happened with Dellin Betances, but I think that we can agree that was because the Yankees wanted no part of him because his arm barely works anymore. Do you think that the Mets will go after LeMahieu?
No, well, they might try, but I think LeMahieu is going to go back to the Yankees. You know, there was one where and this is public knowledge, I'm pretty sure, but this would have been a fun one. Omar Minaya almost got Jorge Posada around 05, 06. I'd have to go double check that, but that would have been a very good dramatic Met steal of a big Yankee. That was the last time I remember that being like a very real thing. He was luring Posada, almost got him. But no, I don't. I think LeMahieu is going back to the Yankees. In fact, I bet you that's the Yankees' big expenditure this offseason because he's going to get a good amount of money.
Yeah, and what an interesting potential contract too, because we've been having conversations in the newsroom about this. Do you give him Josh Donaldson money? Do you give him more than Josh Donaldson? He doesn't hit for as much power as Donaldson does. He's 32, I believe. Yeah. And so we'll see how much he makes. By the way, on that Met Yankee point, last offseason, I thought that Brett Gardner would be a perfect example of that for the Mets. And I actually think that would have been a great signing for the Mets because they would have had a good defensive center fielder. But sometimes this isn't an organization wide across the big leagues thing, but a lot of times like the Yankees had that relationship with CC and with Gardner where they weren't going anywhere. Like they just clearly wanted to be on that team. Do you see that being the case with LeMahieu, that like he and his reps know that if they get a fair deal, he wants to stay there?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
I believe there's mutual interest in just keeping that going. So that would be the first thing. And things can fall through. You know, Brian Cashman also he can be called sometimes in the name of the bigger picture. He can be like, I could see him being like, we offered DJ LeMahieu $110 million. He found 120 elsewhere and we wish him luck. I mean, you could see that happening for sure. But, the Yankees need that guy very badly to hold serve and be as good as they were this year. And I think they know that.
How do you think Sandy would view a high AAV shorter term deal to somebody like Bauer? And do you think, is that in and of itself unrealistic that Bauer would take that? Or do you think he's going to want a longer term
I think the high AAV thing's tough with the luxury tax because that kills you on that front. Like 1 year, $40 million, and all of a sudden, you don't have any, you're over the luxury tax, and every dollar costs you a lot more than $1. So I think that's tough.
Do you think,
like, if you go over the luxury tax, you're taxed so much on each dollar over it that like a 1 year deal at a lot of money really hurts you. And the Mets are to the luxury tax. In fact, when they signed Porcello last offseason, they went over the luxury tax and then got under it by lucking into the Cespedes wild boar thing and restructuring his deal. So the Mets are close. I mean, they have money coming off, don't get me wrong, but then they have to obviously reinvest. So luxury tax is something to be mindful of with the Mets, is my point.
But do you think that we've talked now ad nauseum about Realmuto, how Sandy might view that, but how do you think he looks at somebody like Bauer? Great pitcher.
How we would all look at him. He's a really good pitcher who you have to decide if some of the stuff annoys you. Like Sandy Alderson definitely probably wouldn't enjoy all the tweets about all the different teams like that he's put out over the past week. Like, hey, Nationals, hey, Yankees, hey, it's like, okay, dude. But, he's a good pitcher. He's a good pitcher. So, yeah, you'd have to see what the market is there.
Yeah, I mean, just from a HR perspective, a PR perspective, his Twitter account is kind of a nightmare. But
yeah,
it's like an out of market as just a fan or somebody who covers the game. It's fascinating because like when he's in the middle of the COVID shutdown, tweeting directly, "Hey, Rob," and talking to Manfred, it's like, wow, okay. I'm not sure he speaks for the players or speaks for anyone but himself. But like, it's interesting that we've got guys with Twitter accounts with voices.
There's actually some real tension there was last summer between Bauer and the Players Association. He was not enjoying their approach to the negotiation and gotten some real tension with some leadership in the union, like Andrew Miller and some other guys and Boris clients. So that, yeah, he's definitely not speaking for all the players, but his point, clearly, his philosophy is clearly that baseball players are not given a leeway to have personalities enough. And he believes that baseball players should be marketed better, should market themselves better. And, it's interesting that he's into that. And so that's his whole deal. But he's also a really good pitcher right now. So if you're trying to win, that's a guy that would help you do that.
Isn't Conforto a kind of a big Players Association team rep guy? Wouldn't that be an interesting?
Yeah. If you were represented by Scott Boras and you were Players Association leadership, you probably had a big problem with Trevor Bauer in June, July. And that stuff's water under the bridge now. Baseball players have short memories too with a lot of stuff.
So Jeff suggested this week that we do My Saturday Night. And as soon as I saw it, I knew I couldn't push back on it because we haven't done it in a while. And that, look, I have the excuse of COVID that, if you're not doing anything exciting, it's for good reasons. Mm-hmm. However, I had dinner with my parents. And that's the truth of the situation. It's COVID. I'm not supposed to be doing fun, exciting things out and about. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't anyway. The loyal listeners of this podcast know that I'm a really boring person, and
you're made for the COVID era because all you did before was having dinner with your parents.
I can't even go get coffee, and it's problematic. What about you? Did you do anything fun on Saturday night?
God, I had such an amazingly interesting weekend the previous weekend, but this past weekend, all I did was hang out in the backyard at a safe distance with some neighbors, which was very nice. The kids played, and my neighbor made some food, and that was what we did. It was nice. COVID era fun times. I feel like if I was like, well, I went to this secret show in a loft in Bushwick, and it was packed, and we weren't wearing masks, but it was just such a relief. Like we can't really like have fun. So I'm not sure what the point of this segment is at this time in our world.
Yeah, I mean, and if you had done something cool, you have to make sure that you're willing to talk about it, and that's kind of the good part about being responsible. Is it's like everywhere you go, you have to be willing to be like, you stand by your decision making and been like, yes, that's what I did.
I had dinner at the White House, and I've been feeling a little under the weather since. I'm sure it'll be fine.
I went to a fundraiser in DC. I can't seem to. I had cereal this morning I couldn't taste. COVID. Also looking ahead to the off season of Shea Anything and Baseball Night in New York as well. We have got a lot to figure out in terms of how much teams want to spend, whether spring training is going to start on time, what the budgets are like for teams that potentially will not start their season with fans and teams that will. We're having these conversations as if everything's normal and these contracts and 200 million is the same as it's always been, or it's been for the last handful of years. Not sure that's true.
I've been wondering quite a bit, obviously, when is the next time that there's a jam-packed baseball stadium with everybody up against each other cheering and, like it used to be. And I certainly, no one thinks it'll be the beginning of next season.
Isn't Florida, like, as a state, like, hold my beer? Like, aren't they,
they'll do it and everyone will just get sick. No, I think that what they're doing to make a serious point about this, what they're doing by selling tickets now in the later rounds of the postseason is literally trying something that they hope will work next year during the regular season, which is, can we let in a limited amount of fans and distance them and keep them safe in the ballpark? They're trying out no contact ticketing and no contact vending and things like that. And what they're doing is trying to make this work for next year because they need it. They need as many bodies in the seats as they can safely have for revenue in the industry. So yeah, for sure that we're not expecting it to be normal, and they're trying to figure out right now how much they can do. Because I don't think that, we only know what we read in the news about COVID, but in a more broader sense. But I don't think anyone in our country is expecting normalcy by next spring. It doesn't sound like any of the prognostication. So
yeah,
baseball will be operating under a different set of circumstances. I don't think I'll be allowed to report in a clubhouse next spring training, which is a bummer, all that kind of stuff.
There's so many things that when you think about it, okay, well, if you're outdoors, yeah, sure, social distance, just like anything. Then you think, okay, when you order a hot dog, but you're in the middle of the row and you order it and they just hand like 6 different hands give you the hot dog down the row. And then you're like, hey, pass me the credit card. And 6 different, like that those things can't happen anymore.
Well, and it makes me wonder when in society that'll, even after it's safe. Like I was asking a friend last weekend, when's the next time you're going to Madison Square Garden for a packed concert? Like it's like 3 years, because it's just people are nervous, understandably. But anyway, this conversation does apply to baseball and how different next year is still going to be, unfortunately.
Well, we have an off season to see where it takes us, and we'll know more about what the season will look like and what spring training will look like as we go on. We'll be with Keith next week, but Andy will be with us as we move forward. And every Monday, Shea Anything's coming at you this offseason. Reminder to subscribe, rate, and review again. We appreciate it as always. Thank you, Andy. Talk to you soon.